Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. I will try and be as brief as possible in order not to run too late. We are endlessly talking about national resilience, and that's one of our ways as an institute. One of the ways to measure Israel's resilience is through this survey that we've been holding now. It's second year in a row. And if you'd like to see this, you can see it on our website later and understand all the meanings. We see the low percentages of the sense of security, personal security of Israeli citizens. This is last year's survey at the bottom and this year's at the top. Nobody probably is surprised that the sense of personal security has been reduced, maybe not significantly so, but it hasn't been very high from the outset. If you wish to understand why, what the reasons are for that, you can find it here at the bottom. Of course, the events of October 7th, the functioning of the police, and we'll soon talk about the police separately, and of course, the security situation. As for economic security, perhaps we could have expected that there would be some kind of drop in the sense of security and the backdrop of everything that has happened, and at the backdrop of this talk of what Israeli society thinks or what it wants to do, but there's actually a small increase with respect to the sense of financial security. Those who hardly feel that there's any economic security. These are the reasons: the inflation and prices, of course, the fear of the government's unprofessional behavior on the economic matters. With respect to Israeli unity, and there's another slide that will back this later, and maybe it's not surprising, after the events of October 7th, the terrible events, of course, we can see that the feeling is quite low. Already back last year, a very, very small percentage of Israelis thought that there was unity, and I guess none of us will be surprised by that. There is a certain 10% increase this year, but we're still at a very low point with respect to people's sense of unity, and part of that quite naturally is based on worldviews, different ethnic origins, the fact that we're several tribes. You know, the famous tribe speech made by former President Rivlin here in the Herzliya conference, but many attribute this to the behavior and conduct of the leadership with the judiciary overhaul. 29% blame it on the incitement. They accuse our leadership that cannot generate sufficient unity here in Israel, and this figure is quite amazing. A dramatic increase. Even last year, it was 53%, which is over half the population who think that there is great willingness to contribute to society and to the country. And this year, there's a dramatic 22% increase in this feeling, in the feeling of this willingness. And of course, at the backdrop of everything we've seen in the aftermath of October 7th, but it further increases the gap between what the Israelis are thinking on how the Israeli population is conducting itself and how the government and leadership is conducting itself. This is last year. Only 20% placed a lot of trust in the government. There is a very slight drop, a 2% drop this year, but it's already such a low figure with respect to the trust in the government. And if you wish to know the reasons for that, you can see that the understanding and the feeling that there is governmental corruption, that comes as no surprise. Israel is ranked in the third place in the International Index of Governmental Corruption among Western countries. Loss of trust following October 7th, and the understanding that there is a legislation process and other activities that focus more on sectors rather than on national needs. This year we've included a question that we didn't have last year regarding trust in Israeli police, because Israeli police and the chief commissioner will appear here tomorrow morning, and of course he's been in the eye of the storm over the 18 months of the judiciary overhaul, and especially after October 7th, and now we can see the protests that are resuming. Look at this low level of trust that Israelis are placing in the Israeli police, which is supposed to protect the citizens' safety and security. And if you're looking for the reasons for that, it's a sense of a lack of professionalism, insufficient manpower, and great involvement of the Homeland Security, the National Homeland Minister, in the activities of the police, discriminating enforcement, and political considerations. And if you know how to connect the dots, you understand that it's all actually more or less the same thing. And we wanted to ask this question, which has been a very prominent issue very recently, on the issue of equal burden of military service, and we'll discuss this tomorrow. And 71% of Israelis think that the ultra-Orthodox need to be drafted equally. Is this policy indeed represented by the leadership in the State of Israel? Probably not. I'm not sure that what's happening in the government also represents what the general population thinks, or vice versa. This is a question we asked last year. To what extent would you or your children want to continue or stay to live in Israel? So despite everything we've been through, despite all the events, despite the talk that there's a massive abandonment of professionals and physicians and people from the high-tech sector, look at the data. The citizens of the State of Israel believe in their country. They want to stay here in Israel. And those who feel less connected, they mention the following reasons. I'm not going to read them because we don't have time, but this figure definitely can be connected to something that we'll talk about at the end of this survey. This is a question we asked last year. The figures that we got this year are almost completely identical to what we presented last year. 70% last year answered to a great extent or to a certain extent that they want to live in a secular Jewish nation state. Only 1/4 of the population want to live in a country with traditional traits, and only 7% want to live in a religious country. These figures are identical to last year's figures. Is that manifest in the conduct of the Israeli government? Well, I'm not that sure that this sentiment is manifest. And if I were to conclude this survey briefly, we can see a tremendous difference here between the lack of trust conveyed by the Israelis in its leadership, in its official institutions that are supposed to take care of their personal safety, and the great trust that the population, the Israeli population, express in themselves, in their capabilities and their chances to improve this country. These are two very important topics that we measure in national resilience: a very low feeling of personal safety, a low level of trust in the Israeli police. A vast majority in this country believes that there should be equal drafting to the military. And the characteristics of this country, those who are leading this country today and those who will lead it in the future, will have to pay attention to these issues, because this is what the people of Israel want. So I'd like to thank you for listening, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference.